What's up, BridgePoint? Thank you for tuning in to Safer at Home, day 1352, something like that. I'm just basing that off of what it's felt like, ballpark in my head. As your weekly reminder, it is April 26th, okay? I know for some of you, we're losing track of time, space, and reality in the midst of this. I'm glad that you tuned in today, week 2 of our series, Mind Blown. And we've been really excited about this series because it's an opportunity to look back at the resurrection, look back at what we celebrated on Easter, to realize that this is something bigger than just a once a year celebration, but this impacts our life. Now, judging by the way some of you look at home, you were wearing those exact same sweatpants last week. And so I know you didn't think we could see you. We're doing our best to give it fresh content, but here's the truth. Take a shower today. How long has it been? All right? How long has it been? It's time to refresh yourself. It's time to do something hopeful. It's time to do something that'll be for your good. So start with a shower. I hope that we can't really see you. Some of you are panicking like, oh, I really am wearing the same sweatpants as last week. I hope that as you're tuning in today, that Sundays are just an opportunity, or whenever you're catching us, is an opportunity to be a refresh for your soul. That life right now and in general is a grind, right? It's never been promised that it would be easy, even for us as believers. And so I hope that when you tune in today, you're tuning in excited because you get to remember that while we're inconvenienced, that this isn't normal, while the world's heart is breaking, and while things are difficult at best, brutal at worst, that God is still doing something. That God is still at work in our world, and in the midst of that, our mind can be blown at the fact that hope exists for us. So I'm glad that you're here. If you missed last week's message, you should go back and catch up on that because this week jumps right off on it. But just in an effort to get you on the same page with the rest of us, we talked about this one verse last week and the power of it. That Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples, the day of the resurrection, the day that Jesus walked out of the tomb, Peter arose and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw linen cloths by themselves, and he went home marveling at what had happened. Mind blown. Because Peter recognized that this was unlike anything the world had ever seen before. That suddenly all of Jesus' teachings and everything that he had promised and the entire new way that he issued into the world of loving people selflessly and living for something bigger than ourselves, it had to be right and it had to be true. Peter's mind was blown. And I reminded everybody last week, and we have to jump off from that place because it's always going to be a temptation for us is to believe that there was these Jesus followers. There was this faith movement that was happening. There were Christians. All of this already existed, and that those Christians in this movement made this group of people that inevitably what they did was produce a resurrection story. But this is not a true equation. This isn't even what really happened. Because back in this day, as Jesus was living, his ideas were brand new. They were totally fresh. They were something that the world hadn't seen before. And the temptation is to want to believe that somehow through the Bible as we know it, which didn't exist at this time, or through this Christian faith because pastors say so, or these people that call themselves Christians, which they didn't identify this as that at that time, that we have the resurrection. But that's not true. Here's what is true, and I want you to understand the stark difference. There was an empty tomb. A man who had brutally been murdered on a cross was placed in this tomb. And because this was a true historical event, that was the spark that then created a movement, producing a Bible and the way we live and go to church and try to follow Jesus today, that created a people known as Christians. Do you see the difference? We're not asking and we're not preaching. We don't meet weekly to gather around fables or fairy tales. We gather around a historical event that changed history. In fact, that was the purpose. The big idea of last week, the resurrection of Jesus became the event that changed history. Please don't take my word for it. Please don't take mine. I am by faith holding on to the fact that this is historical, that Jesus' body was never found after he rose from the grave, that he's alive and at the right hand of God today. And I base that off of eyewitness accounts. People that lived, people that saw Jesus alive after his resurrection, and the reality that they're verifying the fact that Jesus' body was never found. And the power of the resurrection, the power of this event changing everything, I think, if we'll allow it to. And for this day and age, we can't see Jesus physically. We can't have been there as an eyewitness ourselves. This was thousands of years ago, but we're holding on to a historical event with verifiable eyewitness testimony to shape in us something bigger than this world can offer us. It's something, it's a death and then a resurrection that changed everything. And the power of that, and what I hope blows your mind today, because as I was working on it this week, it did mine. I was reminded that Jesus' victory over death, that even though it killed him, but when he rose defeating sin and death forever, 1 Corinthians identifies that as the last enemy to be destroyed is death. That what Jesus did by raising, by coming to life after death, he destroyed death. He destroyed everything that we can think and consider when it comes to death. Now, please do not hear me saying, because I'm not, that suddenly we can look at death and it's something to be celebrated, or it shouldn't hurt and create emotion in us. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm talking about the finality of death that drives so much of the world, that drives so much of the way we live. And in a season like we're walking in right now, that is ever present to so many of us, I'm talking about that. But I need you to understand that what Jesus' resurrection reminds us about death is not that death won't come to all of us, but that death doesn't have to be the final answer for any of us. That's the power of the resurrection. Why is it what it is? And in a time where I'm being sensitive to so many in our world that are hurting because they're experiencing this on a real personal level right now, why does this generate the emotion that it does for us? Death is so final. It's the moment that all of our goals, all of our hobbies, all of our activities, all of what we work for, all of what we earned, all of what we're building our lives upon, it is just this end. It is the end point of that. That's why death carries such an emotion to it, is because in this world, we'll all know this. We'll all experience this. And when that moment happens, we have nothing left to earn. We have nothing left that we can build our lives on. We have nothing left that tries to add value to us, because it's just death. It's that moment. And for so many of us, we live almost in fear of this. It drives so much of us that it can paralyze us. It can shape the way we conduct ourselves. It can shape the way we interact with other people. And in a time like this in our world, it can cause us to react in all sorts of ways, filled with all sorts of emotions. But the good news of what we look back to the resurrection is that death was destroyed at the resurrection. I don't mean that people are going to avoid death, and I don't mean that people that experience death are any less a follower of Jesus than you or I that have our faith there. What does it mean then? What does it mean in Corinthians, in the Bible, where it actually says the last enemy that could be destroyed is death? It even goes on in 1 Corinthians later in this very chapter. And Paul writes, "Who got the last word, O death? O death, who's afraid of you now?" It goes on. It was sin that made death so frightening, and the law code guilt that gives sin its leverage, its destructive power. But now, in a single victorious stroke of life, when Jesus walked out of a tomb that held his lifeless body because he came back to life, in a single victorious stroke of life, all three, sin, guilt, and death are gone. The gift of our Master Jesus Christ. Thank God. Death no longer has to be something that drives us, that forces us to operate out of fear, out of shame, bearing the guilt of our lives, knowing that when that moment comes for us, that it doesn't have to be, we point back and try to hang our hats on what our life has been. Death no longer has to frighten us. Here's a powerful thought. It's sin. It was sin that made death so frightening. What is sin? Sin is anything that is disobedient for God's plan for our lives. I choose it. You choose it. We all choose it. This world's full of people that far too often want to live our way, according to our plan, according to our styles and our preferences and our belief at the end of the day that we know better for our lives than even God does. And so it's this, that we take on this mantle as if we were God for ourselves and in control of this life. I love how many people in this season that we're walking life in now that's saying everything about the future is so uncertain right now. When was the future ever not uncertain for you? When was it ever not uncertain for me as if we controlled it? Because sin is this thing that we feel like we have to work to earn our lives. We have to prove to God or some amorphous blob or to our peers of the expectations we're living up to that our life matters and it's worth it. And that's all opposite of what God's been trying to teach us. And so the temptation for all of us is to want to choose our own path and our own way. And then we're racked with guilt when we don't measure up, when we can't perform according to a certain standard. When we're not living up to expectations that others set for our lives, it becomes this overwhelming sense of guilt that can marginalize us, that can create shame in us, that can cause us to just get worn out and beat down with life. Or we react even stronger no matter who we have to mow down to position our life as worth it. But when death is defeated, when the penalty of sin by faith is taken by Jesus, then you and I no longer have to live up to any expectation. You and I no longer have to bear the burden of our life on our own shoulders as if we were made to anyway. You and I then begin to not view death as the moment that we stand before God and try to impress him with our accomplishments as if that was even possible. Instead, we get to view death as the moment we stand before God, recognizing how much he loved us and pursued us to give us a life that sin never could. Mind blown, because that changes everything. If the resurrection was the event that changed history, that means for us, the resurrection means death is no longer an uncertain finale, but instead is the key to life. This pivotal historical event of Jesus coming alive from death reminds all of us that death no longer has to define us as this uncertain finale to our moments. Death now is the key that we might actually know life. That's a powerful thought. Some of you aren't convinced. Some of you are struggling with the idea of faith, of the idea that you can't see it and grab a hold of it. Some of you are looking at that and say, how does Jesus' death or even resurrection, if that was true 2,000 years ago, how could that possibly affect me today? What could that mean for your life? That if this is true, if Jesus' dead body can't be found because he is alive, what could that mean that we're no longer walking around having to build up our accolades and determine our own worth, but instead we recognize that death is suddenly the beginning, that we step into something bigger than this world could ever offer us. And it's in that thought, it's on that vein that I want to take you back to Peter. Remember, Peter was the guy. Last week we talked about him. This week we started. He was the guy that ran to the tomb, stoops down and looks in there, and he sees the death clothes, but no body. And he walks away mind blown thinking, how? What does this mean? If Jesus is alive, what does this mean? We hit on this story real briefly last week, and I want to go back to this point. As Jesus was just beginning his ministry before his death and resurrection, Jesus was just coming onto the scene, and he was building his inner circle of people that he was going to invest in really personally, really deeply and really intentionally. And I want you to see the power of this moment, because sometimes, at least for me, I read over it and because I know it seems familiar, and I miss the weight of that decision. Mark chapter 1, look what happened as Jesus was just getting started and how it affected Peter. Jesus, passing alongside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon, who later became known as Peter. He saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Everyday experience for them. This was nothing new. This was their job. This was their livelihood. This was all according to the schedule of life as they knew it. Everything about this moment was absolutely ordinary until this. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." That's unusual. I've never been going about the business of my day-to-day life, and somebody comes and says, "I'm worth you giving all of your attention, direction, and focus towards following me, because I will make you become something that this world can't offer you." I've never had that happen to me, apart from the call that I believe that Jesus has on my life and yours. And this is really weird. In a day that was probably otherwise quite ordinary, you have Jesus walk up to these two guys who, as far as we know, didn't know each other from Adam. This encounter takes place. And if that was me, if I'm just being honest, if that was me and somebody walked up and said, "Leave behind your career, leave behind what you know as familiar. Leave behind everything that is normal for you. I want you to follow me, because I'm going to help you to become something that you can't become on your own." I would have looked at the guy and absolutely called him crazy and run him right out of that brief interaction of my life. I would have called someone, "Can we get this guy out of here? Because he's not making sense. This is a little odd." This type of thing doesn't happen. But look at the very next statement recorded from the book of Mark, as Mark writes down what Peter was saying to him. Verse 18, "And immediately they left their nets and followed him." What? What just happened? A normal, everyday, uneventful moment. As they were fishing, they were casting their nets. This guy walks up and says, "Follow me and I will make you." And they said, "All right. Okay, we're in on that." Now, it doesn't give us much more description than this moment right here. But for me, as I'm looking in on this, maybe for you too, what had to be going on in Peter's mind that caused him to leave everything familiar and everything that he had built his life upon at that moment to follow Jesus? Was he feeling empty? Did Peter carry this sense of purposelessness and I'm just a fisherman? Was he lonely just in the family business with his brother? Did it feel meaningless? Did he feel like he was going through the motions? Or worse, like how miserable or empty or purposeless do you have to be in a spot in life where you make a snap decision that you leave behind everything familiar to follow this guy? And how do you even know it's worth following? What was going through Peter's mind in that moment? But while we're in that neighborhood, while we can't read into what was going on in Peter's mind, can I ask you and me, and this was the part that just hit me right in my heart this week. Is your life filled with purpose? Do you find a deep satisfaction in the way you're conducting yourself right now? Are you building your life on what you can acquire in your bank account? Because that seems quite unstable right now. Are you building your life on what you can achieve or what you can earn or what you can physically do for yourself? Because we're in a world where that's quite uncertain. Or maybe if you're honest, this time has certainly identified the fact that you feel lonelier than ever. That you feel more hopeless than ever. You feel like life is more out of control than it ever has been. What about for you? Are you going through the motions? Are you just trying to get by to another day? Are you just hoping that the next hour will be better than this hour, but you find out that the next hour is no different, so you hope that the next one is? What is it for you and for your journey right now? I'm not talking about anybody else. And I'd ask you to really clear out some attention, some focus in this moment. What is it about your life What is it about your moment? What is it about what's going on with you that gives you confidence that you're walking directly in God's path for your life? Do you feel like you're making an impact? Do you feel like nobody sees you or hears you? That nobody understands you or knows what you're going through? Are you wondering if you missed it? Are you wondering if there's more to this and you just got off the wrong track and got off at the wrong stop? Are you feeling less than somebody else? Are you letting these circumstances add a definition or a worth to your life or lack thereof in a season like this? Here's what I also know to be true. These are actual statistics. I Googled these. You can find them on the internet as well. Did you know that during this pandemic season, alcoholic beverage sales are up 55% from what they were on this date last year? 55%. People are going out for this just to numb something, to get by with something. I'm not hating on this, but that's just true facts. How about this? Did you know that online gaming usage is up 75% since this outbreak? That's not all teenagers. Let's not kid ourselves. How about this? The actual statistics state that porn usage has gone up 25% since the outbreak. Some porn sites even offering free signups in a season like this. People that want to go and engage with something that devalues another human being's life to get pleasure from them and then discard them when they're done. I'm not trying to hate on those things, but those statistics tell us that the world around us is searching for something that will either numb their reality or take them to a different one, at least for a moment. What about for your life? What about when you hear that Jesus is alive? What about when you hear that the tomb is empty? Because here's what's really, really true for you. This pandemic, this shelter at home season has not made a wreck of your life. It has not caused you to feel this sense of purposelessness. It has not caused you to feel like you're missing your meaning, that you're feeling devalued or less than. The pandemic can only accentuate that. I wonder how many of us are in this season blaming this for the feelings of emptiness, loneliness, missionless, impactless lives, even though the truth is that existed beforehand. We just weren't ready to identify it. I'm not trying to hate this morning, but can I ask you a question, a meaningful, purposeful question? If you'll track with me for just a couple minutes, I want to get to the bottom of it. What would it take for you to quit making a living and start living your life? What would that take? I'm not talking about earning a job. I'm not talking about those of you that are without that right now because of what this season has done. I'm talking about in all the ways we try to take life onto our own shoulders, that we try to be in charge, that we try to write our own story, that we try to chart our own course, that we try to be and impress and live up to and try to present this sense that we're okay and everything's fine and I've got this. What would it take for us to quit making that living and instead to start living our life? What do you mean? Don't tell me I'm not living my life. I do what I want to do. I live the way that I want to live. Then why do the statistics suggest that we're working as a country and as a people to either numb our minds and our lives or to take us somewhere that is a fantasy in nature? It points to something that occurs deep inside of us that causes us to question, is there more to life? Is there more for me? Remember that the power, the mind-blown moment I want to remind you of was Peter. Peter rose and he ran to the tomb. He looks inside. He sees the grave closed by themselves. He went home mind blown because if Jesus was alive, it meant to Peter that life was available to him too. And it meant that death no longer had to define his life. His performance, what he could earn, what he felt like he would deserve, all of that was able to die if Peter will just grab a hold of the life that could be found in Jesus. We want to rebel against that so often. Well, that's just God trying to be in control. That's just God trying to dictate the circumstances. Peter was the eyewitness that we're talking about today. Peter heard Jesus make this statement to his disciples in Matthew 16. He said, then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. See, that's a God that just wants to control. That's this power hungry, tripping on his authority, flexing on us because he's God. That if we don't just abandon everything and walk away from it to serve the Almighty, then we're going to miss out on our lives. Why would anybody want to follow a God like that? As Peter's walking away from an empty tomb, I wonder if part of the reason his mind was blown because everything that Jesus had been teaching him suddenly made sense. It suddenly clicked for him. It suddenly dawned on him that what if this was something more? What if Jesus isn't trying to flex and control us? What if Jesus wasn't trying to suck the fun out of our lives? What if Jesus wasn't just trying to be this authoritarian God that had us by his little puppet strings? What if Jesus, willing to go to the point of death to create life, was on to something more? Remember, here's what I'm asking you. What would it take for you to quit making a living and start living your life? But Tyler, why would I want to follow a God like that? Why would I want to follow a control freak that says anybody that wants to come after me has to be willing to lay down their life, to deny themselves? Why does that suck the fun and the identity out of who I am? Well, I wonder if part of the reason Peter's mind was blown is because he remembered hearing Jesus say statements like Jesus did in John chapter 10, verse 10. Jesus said, I came so that they, people that follow me and by faith grab a hold of me, I came so that they can have real and eternal life. Check this, more and better life than they ever dreamed of. What if everything that we're earning and all the guilt that comes with it and the shame that we readily take upon ourselves, what if everything we desire for our life and we're building towards, what if the life that lasts and the life that's filled with purpose and a life that's filled with meaning and a life that changes the world and a life that's not just a breath through history, but it's something that impacts and redefines the world as we know it, is actually found when we're willing to lay down our lives to pick up a more and better life than we could even dream of? How is that possible? Because Jesus was not only the one that created and purposed you, Jesus demonstrated that life and the power of life was just on the other side of death. That by Jesus willing to die, to take on the weight and the burden of our sin, became the keys that opened up new life. Not a life about control, not a life to keep you in a box, not a life that would marginalize you or make you feel so guilty or shameful for the way you and I have conducted ourselves, but instead, real and eternal life, more and better than what we could even dream up for ourselves. What if Jesus asking us to lay down the dreams and the plans and the hopes and the ideas that we've created for us is just an attempt to lay down that which is less than the plans and the hopes and the dreams and the purpose for which he created us? That death to self means to come alive to Jesus. Because Jesus also warned us. You can ignore it. You don't have to take a hold of this. But Jesus, in an appointed moment in Matthew chapter 16, same passage. But what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? What's it going to mean if you earn everything this world has to offer you, but deep on the inside, you are still so empty, so lost, and so broken? And I wonder if it was a moment like this that when Jesus walks up to Peter and says, "Come follow me," Peter said, "I've got nothing to lose." Because here's what I want you to know. The resurrection means death is no longer an uncertain finale, but instead the key to life. That we lay down ourselves, we die to ourselves so that we can come alive with life. It means that in the moment when our physical death actually happens, we're not having to present our case to God saying, "Please have mercy on me," as if we could impress him with what we do, but instead we go before God and say, "Thank you that you loved me enough to give me a life that I couldn't give and earn for myself." Mind blown. What if that empty tomb points to the fact that Jesus' life, overcoming death, can define your life with a purpose that you and I could never create for ourselves? Here's what it meant for me as a teenage kid. Was planning to run hospitals or nursing homes with my life because it made a good paycheck and I knew I could impact and care for people, some of them in their most vulnerable moments. You know, based on what's going on in our culture, I'm so glad I'm not running hospitals and nursing homes right now. And I have nothing but love for those of you that are on the front lines of taking care of this pandemic that exists all around us. But you know what it meant for my life? It meant I got to come alive in a season and attempt to dispense hope and an offer to step into something greater than any of us, myself included, could have ever asked or imagined for us. What if everything you're trying to build into your life is so much less than all the purposes and plans that Jesus has for it? What if everything you're seeking is just on the other side of your willingness to lay down your life and take a hold of Jesus? What if your mind needs to blow today because the tomb is empty and Jesus is alive? Would you pray with me? God, I know that for some of my friends, they're sitting at home, they're tuning in, wherever they are, in their car, on the couch, on the porch, whatever it is. And right now, there's part of them, if we're honest, there's a part of us that's wondering, is there more for me? Is this it? Have I missed it? Did I take a wrong turn? Why do I feel so guilty? Why do I feel not good enough? Why do I feel like I can't measure up? Why do I feel like I'm not earning this enough? And God, I'm just reminded that this pandemic is not creating those feelings in us. It's just accentuating them. And God, what if, as Jesus reminds us, that gap that exists inside of us is just enough of a gap that you created inside of us to be filled so completely and so satisfactorily by you that nothing in this world will do. Nothing in this world can offer us that satisfaction. Nothing in this world offers us that kind of purpose and meaning and value. Nothing in the midst of a pandemic can fill us with peace, hope, and love like a personal, known relationship with the God of the universe that was dead and stepped out of the tomb. God, our minds are blown. Help us to trust it and live it more. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.